You still rent at your age, my brother said in front of everyone. You're a failure to the family name. Until he found out who owned his entire estate. I leaned against the kitchen counter, fingers wrapped around a cold soda can, wishing I were invisible. My brother Damien stood in the center of the room, surrounded by our relatives, describing his gleaming new Tesla. He threw a smug glance my way, loud enough for everyone to hear. You're still renting, Audrey? He snorted. At your age? Still giving money to landlords? Laughter rippled through the crowd. My chest tightened, but I forced a polite smile. I'd grown used to his taunts. In my family, success is a performance, and Damien's the star. He was the one who always had the flashy house, the designer suits, the bragging rights. I picked up a cookie and took a deliberate bite to hide the trembling in my jaw. Damien kept talking. Some people just don't have drive, he said. It's sad, really. I looked at the Easter decorations on the table, pastel flowers wilting under the harsh living room lights. Even in this festive setting, I felt singled out. I wanted to leave. But before I could slip away, he turned to me again. You're a disappointment, sis. He whispered loud enough for me alone. My stomach churned. I wondered if he had any idea what was coming next. After the gathering, I found Damien by the coat rack. He was grinning, phone in hand, probably checking his investment apps or texting his wife about some fancy purchase. You really should do better, he said softly. The family's embarrassed by you. A tremor raced through me, anger mixing with hurt. What do you mean? I asked, even though I knew exactly what he meant. You live in that tiny apartment, he said, rolling his eyes. You own nothing. Grandpa left me everything, and I used it to build something worthwhile. But you? You're stuck playing small. He flicked invisible dust off his expensive jacket. You have no property, no real success. It's a shame. I clenched my fists, nails biting into my palms. Damien talked like he was self-made, but he'd had help at every step. Our parents praised him. Our grandfather funded him. He wore his achievement like a crown. My cheeks burned, but I forced a calm mask. There was so much I wanted to say. How I had spent years quietly learning, investing, and building. But I didn't speak. Instead, I nodded, grabbed my coat, and left. In my mind, a single thought blazed. Enough is enough. I drove home in silence. The city lights blurring through my windshield. My heart was still pounding from Damien's harsh words. Yet beneath the sting something else stirred, determination. When I arrived at my modest apartment building, I paused in the lobby, exhaling slowly. My nerves were on edge, but I wouldn't let him derail my peace. Up on the 10th floor, I unlocked my front door and flicked on the lights. Inside, it felt calm. The place was warm and minimalistic. A carefully curated painting hung in my hallway, an original piece from a rising artist. The furniture was understated yet custom-made, each chair and table telling a quiet story of quality over flash. I set my purse on the counter and opened a sleek silver laptop. A moment later, I pulled up a private spreadsheet. The rows of text and numerical figures scrolled by in a blink. So much detail. So many assets. My eyes scanned for a second. Just enough to confirm everything was as it should be. I closed the laptop with a firm click. Heart steady now. Let them think what they want, I thought. Let Damien mock me for renting. He had no idea what I truly owned. I can still remember the day Damien got his first fancy suit. He was 12, and I was 10. Our parents fussed over him, adjusting his tie and polishing his little dress shoes. I watched from the sidelines in a plain shirt and secondhand jeans. Even then, Damien soaked up their attention like a sponge. They praised his every move, his looks, his grades, his potential. Meanwhile, I was told, stay in your lane, Audrey. Let Damien shine. I grew up invisible, or so it felt. During recitals, Dad only videotaped Damien's parts. At dinner, Mom asked about Damien's day first, ignoring me until I spoke up. It was clear who was the star child. Now years later, I feel that same ache. Old memories resurface. Damien bragging about a new toy while I clutched a worn teddy bear. Our parents beaming at him. I tried to speak, but no one heard me. I grit my teeth, remembering how each slight taught me resilience. I learned to be quiet, to channel my energy into planning my future. My success would never be loud. It would be patient, slow building, and unstoppable. I close my eyes, letting the memories fade. A new chapter is unfolding. When Grandpa passed, it felt like an earthquake in our family. His will left almost everything to Damien. Property, stocks, a significant trust fund. It was a huge surprise, or maybe not. Damien had always been the favorite. I got nothing in the official papers, not even a sentimental trinket. I remember sitting in the lawyer's office feeling numb as the details were read aloud. Damien smirked at me, though he pretended to look solemn. I didn't cry in front of them. I refused to give him that satisfaction. Afterwards, I walked out into the parking lot and stared at the sky. The air felt heavy, but in that moment, a resolve took shape in my mind. I would succeed anyway. Without the family's resources, I have to do it on my own. And so I did. I started small. I worked part-time jobs, studied every financial book I could find. I learned how to invest quietly, methodically. I flipped modest properties in emerging markets. I saved every penny, made strategic moves, and stayed invisible. I felt the sting of that inheritance divide. But looking back, I see it as my spark, my push to become someone who didn't need anyone's permission to thrive. A few weeks after Easter, I got a sealed invitation for a high-profile gala. The letter congratulated me on a philanthropic award for my recent funding of community libraries. My heart fluttered. I rarely accepted public recognition, but this one felt too meaningful to ignore. That evening, Damien dropped by unexpectedly. He wandered into my apartment, tossing a casual glance at my neat living room. His eyes flickered over the invitation on the kitchen table. "What's this?" he asked, picking it up. "A gala? You?" His tone was dripping with disbelief. I shrugged. "Some event for donors?" Damien smirked, setting the envelope down. "Who'd you scam for that?" The insult slammed into me, but I just stared at him, refusing to rise to his bait. I could see the confusion in his eyes. He couldn't figure out how someone who apparently owned nothing could get recognized at a prestigious event. "It's not your business," I said coolly. He let out a short laugh. "That's right. It doesn't matter anyway." At that moment, I knew I'd reached a turning point. I wouldn't explain myself to him. I'd let actions speak, and soon enough, he would learn the truth. I started hearing rumors from extended family. Cousins, aunts, and uncles would call me or text me out of the blue, asking, "Are you okay?" They sounded worried, almost pitying. Apparently, Damien was telling everyone that I was in huge debt or that I was renting because I couldn't afford a down payment. He even hinted I might be involved in something illegal. It was an outlandish claim, but in my family, gossip stuck to the wall like glue. And since I rarely shared personal details, people believed him. They assumed I was either broke or hiding something shady. Our mother didn't stand up for me. She'd always favored Damien, so I wasn't shocked. But it still hurt when she echoed his stories. "Maybe you should clear things up," she suggested on the phone. "Damien says you're in trouble." I just told her, "I'm fine, Mom," then hung up. With every rumor, I felt the gap between us growing. Damien was rallying the family against me, and I refused to play his game. I wouldn't defend myself to people who never bothered to see me clearly in the first place. But inside, I was fuming. The next step I decided would speak for itself. I took a drive back to our childhood neighborhood. It felt surreal seeing those familiar streets. The trees had grown taller, the sidewalks more worn. Eventually I parked outside our old home, an empty house with a for sale sign staked in the lawn. I stood there remembering how Dad used to mow that lawn with me tagging along. How Mom planted roses that never quite bloomed. Memories good and bad washed over me. The times I hid in my room while Damien got all the praise, or the times I sneaked out at night to stargaze alone. Now the house looked tired. The windows were dusty, the paint peeling. A pang of sadness hit me. This was the place where I'd felt invisible, but it was also part of me. I dialed the number on the sign, speaking calmly to the real estate agent. My offer was full cash, masked under one of my shell companies. It was accepted without fanfare. Just like that, I reclaimed the setting of so many childhood hurts. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The old house shrank behind me, but for the first time, I felt like I had the power to rewrite its significance in my life. One Saturday morning, the buzzer rang. I checked the camera feed from my apartment door. Damien and his wife. They rarely came unannounced, so I braced myself. I opened the door. Damien gave me a tight-lipped smile. His wife followed, her gaze sweeping my apartment like she was looking for dirt. "We're worried about you," Damien began, voice dripping with false concern. "We think you're not portraying a good image for the family." I motioned them to the couch and offered tea, staying polite. He refused with a wave of his hand. He started lecturing me about appearances. "Your lifestyle, it's embarrassing. Mom and Dad didn't raise us to be small." My pulse pounded in my ears, but I kept my composure. "What exactly do you want from me?" I asked. He sighed dramatically. "Just step up. Get a real place. Show some ambition. I don't want to feel ashamed introducing you to my partners." I caught his wife smirking. She adjusted a flashy bracelet on her wrist, probably brand new. The tension thickened in the air. I took a breath, letting silence speak for me. In that moment, I knew I'd never hand Damien the explanation he craved. Not yet. Damien pivoted quickly to his latest grand plan, real estate development. He was full of enthusiasm, eyes alight as he described prime land he wanted to turn into a high-end complex. He was looking for investors, he said. Thought I might be desperate enough to join. I couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. And why would I do that? Because it's a gold mine, he insisted, ignoring my skeptical tone. You'll finally get a real piece of the action. He slid a thick folder across the table. I flipped through the glossy images and documents listening to him brag about potential profits. But as I read deeper, I noticed glaring red flags, zoning issues, environmental restrictions. This project was doomed. I handed the folder back. No, thanks. It's not viable. He laughed, shaking his head. Audrey, you never did have vision. You're missing out. He stuffed the papers into his briefcase. I watched him stand and button his suit jacket, confidence dripping from his every move. We locked eyes. In that moment, our battle lines were drawn. I was done letting him treat me like a fool. Next time he came to me, he'd realize how truly short-sighted he was. After that tense confrontation, I withdrew from family gatherings. I no longer had the patience for the charades. When mom or cousins called, I let their calls go to voicemail. My energy went into my life, managing my portfolio, enjoying a lakeside property I'd recently purchased under another discrete entity. In my spare time, I poured myself into humanitarian efforts. I'd organized a food drive campaign for children in Botswana, and it was a huge success. Photos of smiling kids, local volunteers, and crates of supplies reminded me why I preferred to stay under the radar. Real good didn't need an audience. Meanwhile, the tension with Damien simmered on. The rumors he spread kept circling back, but I stayed silent. I didn't need to explain anything. My track record, my data, my real estate projects spoke volumes in private. Each morning, I opened my laptop with a sense of quiet pride. My spreadsheet was growing. My name or my various company names appeared on documents tied to properties, vineyards, and other holdings. It was a world Damien would never dream existed. In solitude, I found clarity. I no longer cared to convince anyone else of my worth. The first sign of Damien's trouble came through an email rumor at my finance consultancy. Word spread that his latest venture was shaky. Investors were pulling out. Then I heard he borrowed money to keep up appearances. Apparently, he needed over $300,000 to hold on to some new toy for his wife. Behind that polished image, cracks were forming. His real estate dream wasn't panning out. The zone was flagged for ecological reasons. Permits were delayed and legal battles loomed. Meanwhile, Damien continued throwing lavish parties, buying luxury cars, and traveling first class. It was like watching someone dance on a tight rope that was fraying at the edges. My phone chimed one evening with a text from a distant cousin. Is Damien in trouble? Heard rumors. Hope you're okay. I ignored the message, but my thoughts spun. If his funds were running thin, how long before he started defaulting on payments? How long before the banks came knocking? I felt a strange pang of sympathy. For all his smugness, Damien was still my brother. But I also remembered every cruel word he'd spat at me. Whatever came next, I suspected it would be the harsh wake-up call he'd never had before. A few weeks later, I got an urgent call from the property manager of a prestigious suburb. One of the largest estates was behind on its mortgage, and the manager wanted to confirm if I, as the true owner, was aware. I froze. I had almost forgotten about that particular acquisition. Years ago, I'd bought a cluster of luxury homes through a trust. I rarely thought about it. I let the management team handle everything. But now, it seemed Damien's mansion, his pride and joy, was actually under that same umbrella. The realization stunned me for a moment. Damien had been living there, boasting about his house while unknowingly paying rent to my trust. The property manager explained that Damien had requested a grace period. He was in arrears for the month and needed the landlord's approval. Then came the question. Ma'am, how would you like to handle this? I took a breath. Give him the standard process, I said calmly. No special treatment. As I hung up, my heart thumped wildly. Damien had unknowingly been giving rent money to me all this time. And now, the moment had arrived for our roles to shift completely. My doorbell rang like an alarm. I opened it to find Damien, face red with anger, practically vibrating. He shoved papers in my face before I even said hello. Is this a joke to you? He roared. You own my house, my entire estate? I didn't blink. I'm not sure what you're talking about, I said evenly, stepping back to let him enter. He stormed into my living room, hands shaking. I just found out you're the one who bought the property. This is worth millions, Audrey, millions. How did you manage that? I folded my arms, heart pounding, but voice steady. I acquired it a while ago through a trust. It's business, Damien. He stared at me, disbelief and fury battling on his face. You lied, he shouted. You pretended to be broke, renting. I cut him off. I never pretended anything, you assumed. He threw the papers down on the coffee table. So what now? Are you going to evict me? His voice was dripping with sarcasm, but I sensed the fear in his eyes. My lips curved into a grim smile. I haven't decided yet, I said softly. He glared, chest heaving, and for once, he had no comeback. Our mother called me the next day, voice quivering with anger. How could you do this to Damien? She demanded. He's your brother. I sighed, pressing the phone against my ear. Mom, what exactly did he tell you? That you're trying to ruin him? She snapped. You set him up to fail, made him borrow money he couldn't repay. My teeth clenched, so he was spinning the story again. He borrowed that money himself, Mom. I had no say in that. She wouldn't listen. You're always trying to make him look bad. This is ridiculous, Audrey. I glanced out my window watching the sun reflect on the city skyline. Memories flashed of all the times I'd been blamed while Damien was coddled. Every muscle in my body felt tight with frustration. Mom, I said, voice trembling with suppressed hurt. Damien did this to himself. He's the one who overspent, not me. She responded with silence, then a bitter huff. Stop trying to overshadow him, Audrey, enough. The line went dead. I exhaled slowly, trying to calm my racing heart. Even now, they refused to see my side. My mother's words rang in my ears. You're always trying to make him look bad. Maybe it was time the truth spoke for itself. That weekend, I boarded a plane to France. I needed space to breathe and I had a few projects to oversee. The next morning, I found myself walking through a sprawling vineyard I'd owned for years. Rows of grapes stretched out under a bright sun, the soil rich with possibility. This was my secret world. No flashy Instagram posts, no fancy labels, just real work, real fruit, and real prosperity. The vineyard workers knew me as Audrey, the quiet investor who occasionally visited, asked gentle questions, and paid them fairly. Later, I visited an architectural site where a museum was being renovated. I was helping fund it, wanting to preserve local history. The lead architect greeted me warmly. We walked through rooms filled with dusty remnants of the past, discussing plans to transform them into interactive exhibits. Standing there, I felt free. Away from my family's constant judgments and Damien's sneers, I could see the impact of my investments. I'd built a life that mattered, a world of understated wealth and genuine purpose. I flew back home after a few days, energized. Damien could keep mocking me. I had no need to shout my achievements. I was content in my quiet empire. When I returned, the gossip mill was in overdrive. Damien's house was on the brink of foreclosure. His business partners were suing him for mismanaged funds. Apparently he diverted client money to cover personal expenses. And the rumor was the law firm had discovered everything. I heard snippets from old classmates, from distant relatives who found my number to ask, "Is it true?" The drama was swirling, but I stayed on the sidelines quietly observing how quickly his facade was crumbling. One morning, I caught a glimpse of Damien in a local cafe. He was hunched over a laptop, face pale, eyes puffy. The fancy suit was gone, replaced by wrinkled casual clothes. Even from a distance, I sensed his desperation. He didn't see me. I slipped out before he could notice. A pang of guilt tugged at my chest. He was my brother after all. But he'd always chosen pride over humility, showmanship over sincerity. The question weighed on me. Should I offer help or let him learn this painful lesson? For now, I decided to stay out of his sight. Reality was crashing down on him and there was no easy bailout. A week later, I sent Damien a formal notice through my property management company, a 3-month grace period to settle outstanding payments. It was a small mercy, but the letter clearly stated that if he refused the arrangement, the usual eviction process would continue. His reply came via a curt email. "I don't need your charity," he wrote. "I won't be humiliated." A chill settled in my bones as I read his words. Even now, with everything falling apart, he couldn't swallow his pride. I stared at the screen, remembering how he called me a failure for renting, how he smeared at my supposed lack of ambition. I typed a short response, "Then I suggest you read your lease." I hit send, heart pounding. This was the line in the sand. I'd offered him help. He rejected it. Fine. Let the contract dictate what happens next. I couldn't keep shielding him from consequences. His silence afterward was deafening. For the first time in forever, I sensed Damien truly grasped that I held the upper hand. The next few weeks would seal our fates, one way or another. The next call I got was from a friend who worked at Damien's firm. Apparently, they'd sacked him. The missing funds he diverted were too large to ignore, and the partners had lost all trust. Clients were leaving in droves, and the damage was irreversible. Shortly after that, the property manager confirmed Damien and his wife had been officially evicted. He hadn't paid a dime nor made any attempt to negotiate. The final lock change was scheduled. The unraveling of his life was nearly complete. I felt numb hearing this. Part of me was relieved. Finally, justice. Another part of me was sad. We were siblings. It didn't have to come to this if he'd only recognized that money wasn't the measure of a person. If only he'd shown an ounce of humility. But it was too late. He'd refused every lifeline I quietly offered. He'd spent his whole existence belittling me for renting, for not flashing my wealth. And now, ironically, he found himself with no home at all. I didn't celebrate. I just let the process run its course. Sometimes you have to let people crash before they learn. The next family dinner was a tense affair. We met at my mother's house, a cramped old place that still reeked of nostalgia. Damien stumbled in late, looking disheveled. Everyone's eyes were on him, waiting for an explanation. He glared around the table, red-eyed and trembling. Suddenly, he pointed at me, voice shaking with rage. "You betrayed me. You destroyed my reputation, made me lose my job." My relatives gasped. Some looked at me in disbelief. Others whispered among themselves. Mom just stared, tears in her eyes. I set my fork down calmly, my heart pounding. "Damien, you did that yourself. You took money from your own firm. You defaulted on your mortgage. I only enforced the contract you signed." He slammed his fist on the table, silverware clattering. "You're lying. You're just jealous." I stood slowly, refusing to be cornered. The tension was unbearable. The air charged with shock and confusion. I glanced at my mother, who looked torn between us. Without another word, I left the table. My chest felt tight, but I held my head high. I wouldn't stay in a room where I was painted as the villain for someone else's downfall. Days passed with no word from Damien. From what little I heard, his wife walked out, taking what jewelry and designer clothes she could. His once proud circle of friends avoided him. His old law firm was pressing charges for embezzlement. In his big, empty rental, no longer the estate he thought he owned, he stewed in silence. I pictured him there, stripped of his trophies, a man whose pride had left him with nothing but regrets. I didn't call. I had no desire to step back into the chaos he created, but a part of me wondered if he was finally seeing the truth. That real success isn't about flashy wealth or belittling others. The family too seemed adrift. Cousins and aunts called me less uncomfortable with the drama. Our mother was caught in the middle. She left voicemails for me, but I wasn't ready to hear them. Even though I felt a pang of guilt, I reminded myself, Damien chose his path. Now alone, he had only one companion, his own reflection. Maybe, just maybe, this forced silence would lead him to growth. Or maybe he'd just lash out more. Months slipped by. My life continued moving forward, meetings, travels, philanthropic projects. I rarely thought about Damien. Then one day, a letter appeared in my mailbox. The return address was scribbled, but I recognized his handwriting instantly. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No grand speeches. No excuses. Just a simple, almost shaky note. "Audrey, I didn't see you. I didn't try. I'm sorry." My breath caught. I stared at those words, tears unexpectedly pricking my eyes. For all his arrogance, this was the first time Damien had shown any semblance of humility. I read it again, looking for hidden agendas, but it seemed genuine, a small step toward admitting he was wrong. I folded the letter carefully, heart heavy with memories, good, bad, and everything in between. I didn't know how to respond or if I even wanted to. A single line of apology doesn't erase years of hurt. But it was something. It meant maybe in the quiet of his new life, he'd realized how much damage he'd done. For the moment, I tucked the letter away. I wasn't sure where things would go from here, but I felt a faint flicker of hope. 1 month later, I found myself on the balcony of a sun-kissed villa in Italy. I decided to spend some time away, letting the ocean breeze and rolling hills soothe my spirit. The stone terrace overlooked a valley of olive trees and vineyards. It was quiet, peaceful. I leaned against the railing, the apology letter still tucked in my luggage. I hadn't written back. Part of me wanted to at least say, "I got your note." Another part felt it was better to leave things unsaid. I needed space to live without the heaviness of family drama. As the sun set, painting the sky in ribbons of pink and orange, I sipped a glass of local wine, letting my mind wander. No more secrets. No more half-lies to maintain illusions. For once, I felt free to enjoy my life on my own terms. Damien was at a crossroads of his own, somewhere halfway across the world. He would either learn from this or keep blaming others. Either way, I couldn't control that. I could only choose my own path. In that moment, I decided I'd live fully without apology. Whether my family ever understood didn't matter anymore. My time in Italy felt like a gentle dream. Each morning, I woke to the sound of distant tractors tending the vines. Each night, I fell asleep to the lullaby of cicadas under the warm moonlight. But it wasn't just a vacation. One afternoon, I strolled down to the vineyard below my villa. A small discreet sign stood at the edge of the property. In simple letters, it read, Audrey Estates, Est, 2009. Yes, I'd owned it for years. Another hidden piece of my quiet empire. I knelt beside the sign, running my fingers over the lettering. This was my life's work, cultivating something real, honest, and lasting. I thought about how my family never knew, how they only saw Audrey the renter. They never guessed how far my roots actually stretched. In that moment, I felt a surge of gratitude. This land was mine. The success was mine. Not because of Grandpa's inheritance or my parents' favoritism. I built it all from scratch, investing my time and resources carefully. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath of vineyard air. The final piece of my puzzle was in place. My story didn't need an audience. It was enough just to live it. I returned home a few weeks later to find my mailbox full of generic bills, junk flyers, and one new envelope from Damien. This time it contained a longer letter. He wrote about losing everything, hitting rock bottom, and how he finally understood the damage pride had caused. He asked for a chance to meet. No business pitch, no manipulations, just a talk. I sat at my desk, staring at his words. My heart conflicted. Part of me wanted to slam the door on the past, but another part whispered that forgiveness doesn't have to mean forgetting. It can mean letting go of old wounds and moving forward with caution. In the end, I texted him a simple reply. Let's meet for coffee. Not to fix everything, but to see if healing was possible. Maybe we'd never be best friends. But if there was a seed of understanding, I wanted to try. I looked around my apartment, so humble yet filled with subtle opulence if you knew where to look. My phone buzzed with a message from the property manager in France. Another orchard had borne fruit under Audrey Estates. I smiled. My quiet power stood firm, and finally, the dawn of a new chapter began.